This is Ian Cameron for Sportsbook Review with your college basketball play of the day for Saturday, January 14th. And we're heading to Pac-12 action for tonight's play of the day. It's Washington taking on Stanford. And I think we have a situation here where Washington is on this way down. And I think Stanford, despite some lumps early in conference play, some really bad struggles on the defensive end of the basketball court, I think there are some positive signs that we're starting to see from the Stanford Cardinal. Their last couple of games, they started Pac-12 season really in disastrous fashion. They lose at home to Arizona State. They get blown out by Arizona. They lose in blowout fashion on the road at USC. Last two games, though, 2-0 ATS for Stanford. Competitive and at least somewhat competitive in defeat against UCLA, 89-75, but they do cover as 21-point dogs in that game. And then in their last game at home against Washington State, one of their best defensive efforts of the season, I think. 84-54, a blowout win by 30. They held the Cougars to 18 of 56 shooting in that basketball game. Just demolished them on the glass, 39-22. Positive signs for Jared Haas's team. Jared Haas is a good coach. Jared Haas, of course, took UAB to the NCAA tournament where they pulled that first round upset a few years ago. This guy can coach, and I know it's been a struggle for him. It's been a little bit of an underachievement early in the season so far for Stanford, sitting at 9-8. But I think that could be a little bit of a buy sign. The way they hung tough at UCLA, the way they blew out Washington State, and I know Washington State's not one of the better Pac-12 teams, but it's a positive sign, a step in the right direction for Stanford, some positive momentum, which I think can carry over to this game here against Washington. I don't like this Huskies team. They rely far too much on that star player, Markelle Fultz. Outside of that, there's not a hell of a lot of options offensively. There's a lot of inconsistent play, it seems, from the rest of this Washington Huskies roster. That's a problem. I am not enamored with the way this team plays defensively on a consistent basis. That's also an issue I have with them. Now, the one concern here is Washington, has dominated Stanford, especially last year. Washington pummeled Stanford 64-53 at home. And then again in the, I believe it was the Pac-12 tournament, they beat Stanford handily 91-68. So ugly results for Stanford against Washington, but that's last year. This is a new season. There's also a new head coach now that Stanford has. And like I say, the way Washington played too on the road at Cal, they played a decent basketball game, one of their better basketball games in quite some time. But they let it slip late. I mean, Cal just took over, and Washington had no answers. Washington hung on barely for a point spread cover. They lose 69-59. I think they're in trouble off the letdown of that big effort at California, now going on the road again to take on this Stanford team. And I think Stanford comes into this game with some positive momentum and something that they'll be looking to carry over here in this game. Also worth noting, Stanford's slightly better free throw shooting team. That could matter in this kind of point spread range. Again, I think Lorenzo Romar might be walking on thin ice. Their only Pac-12 win, Washington, so far against Oregon State, and they're horrendous. So nothing to write home about for the Huskies, that's for sure. And let's not forget, in matchups of common opponents, Washington played Washington State already this season, lost to Washington State at home in Seattle, 79-74, lost to Washington State as 12.5-point favorites, whereas we just saw Stanford at home crush that same Washington State team. So maybe a little sign that Stanford, the better of these two teams, and maybe a little bit of a favorite price range here that's a little bit short on this Stanford team. At least I think it is when I look at this point spread. So why don't we go ahead, let's make this one official. Let's see what the best line is. We can give you -5. That's what we'll do. Let's go with Stanford, the Cardinal, -5, rotation number 646. Stanford, -5 over Washington. I think Stanford has some positive momentum on their side and maybe ready to turn a corner here. Following that win against Washington State, maybe a sign that there's maybe some bet-on opportunities moving forward with Stanford starting tonight. Let's look to Stanford, -5, play of the day in college basketball for Saturday, January 14th. All right, that'll wrap it up. I'm Ian Cameron for Sportsbook Review. Until next time, enjoy the games and good luck.
Go to SBRodds.com. Browse, compare, and shop live odds available at top online sportsbooks.